So, I won't lie, for the longest while, I had no idea what the book I'm talking about today was even about because, I saw that Janelle Monae was releasing a book, and, I'm a fan of their music, and, I think they're definitely a strong lyricist, so I was interested, in seeing what a book, by them would be about. Also, if you haven't gathered yet, I'm talking about Janelle Monae, the Memory Librarian and other stories from Dirty Computer.
Believe that. Well, so what's up?
At first I did wonder whether it would be an autobiography of some kind or, something to that effect. Because that is what honestly to me the title suggested, but it's not the case. So what I would consider to be the blurb says a lot. There's three whole paragraphs. So I've just cut it down and I'm gonna read off my notes. But in the Memory Librarian, Janelle Monae brings to the written page the Afro-futuristic world of one of their critically acclaimed albums, exploring how different threads of liberation, queerness, race, gender plurality, and love become tangled with future possibilities of memory and time stuck in a totalitarian landscape, and what the costs might be when trying to unravel and weave them into freedoms. It's a collection of 5 stories with collaborators that serves tales to the readers that dissect the human trials of identity expression, technology, and love, reaching through the worlds of memory and time, and the stakes, the power that pulls there. I think I've read that last sentence wrong, and yeah, because that is a lot. Basically, it's a collection of 5 short stories, and I say short, 2 of them are 80 pages, so even then they're not that short. I mean, I'm not gonna be able to do this video like how I would normally do these videos, because normally how I do them is I'll talk about the first 3 chapters or the first few chapters, and then I'd sort of just go from there, talking about the characters, plot, pacing, all that kind of jush. But what I figured out I've had to do for this is basically give a brief overview of each of the 5 stories and talk about them towards the end. And I'm not really, and I can't really go too far in depth, otherwise this video will end up being ridiculously long.
Wig, okay. Wig, did you just say wig? Yes.
So yeah, the first short story in this it's literally just called The Memory Librarian, and it's by Monet and Alea Dawn Johnson. But the Memory Librarian, it's C. Seshet. She is the director librarian of the Little Delta Repository, essentially the queen of the city, more or less. And in her mind, something has been very wrong for weeks, and Seshet's protege Jordan comes into her office, and he tells her that basically she needs to get out of the office and get into the city and really experience what's going on in the city that basically she's controlling. I think the vibe that I got was that Jordan wanted Seshet to, essentially get a little bit more humanity and experience life. So in her doing that, she goes out, she gets drunk, and sleeps with this woman Alethea who she feels this intense connection to. So Miss Seshet, she really blasted out of her office, all cylinders on slay mode. And then in Seshet's position, she pretty much has the memories of everyone in the city in her head, which was a wild concept in itself. There's this point in the story where this man calls out to her, and obviously this woman that Seshet has never met defends her, but because Seshet has essentially everyone's memories in her, in her head, she knows pretty much everything about this woman already. And she also mentions how she's kept the center of the city in her type mold, but the outskirts and the further out from the city you go, the less of a grasp she has on it, which is hint hint. And I mean, when I said I'd talk about each of the stories at the end, some of them I've made little comments in my notes after their paragraphs, and some of them I've just kept till the end. That was that point. But yeah, the second short story is Nevermind by Monet and Danny Law. It follows Jane, which, before I even mentioned the story, I believe Jane was or is essentially a character or alter ego that, Monet had created. And I don't remember whether Jane makes much of an appearance in Dirty Computer, the album. I know, she has the tracks, Django Jane, and I think it's just an interlude called, Jane's Dream, so she does get referenced. But, I believe Jane, she's heavily referenced in the Electric Lady era. And I believe she is Android 57821. But Nevermind follows Jane, who is like a resident of the Pink Hotel, who heads to this essentially a sacred place called the Cave that I believe is like sacred to the people of the Pink Hotel. She goes with her friend Nia, and they go to this cave in order to essentially recall a memory. Jane has been essentially labelled a dirty computer by New Dawn, the city or area from like the last story that Sesha is essentially in charge of. And dirty computers, like in the context of this book, is like, or are like people or androids that essentially like stray from the norm, basically. The kind of clothes that the people of the Pink Hotel wear are like labelled in the book as like cast off couture and salvaged streetwear. And it seemed like the people of the Pink Hotel were essentially living their lives free, like how they truly wanted, outside the clutches, of the city. And the Pink Hotel, we find out that, they have this festival every year that's a celebration of creativity in all forms. But like some wires in the, hotel's power get cut. And like we're introduced to something like this concept called the Blush Hounds, which are essentially like scouts from New Dawn. And essentially the conflict in this story is like something happens that impedes on the freedom of like how the Pink Hotel is supposed to work. And like the world, from the Memory Librarian, the first short story, does get expanded. On this one, like explanations we get in this second story are for things in the first. Now, one thing I will have to say is, after reading these first two stories, it's like a neutral criticism would be like the length, because the first two, they are like 80 pages a piece. Like when you get a regular novel, they are often between like 300 and 400 like pages, like normally. And like with these first two being like 80 pages, that would be like a solid quarter or like a solid chunk of these novels. And like by that point, because these ones were 80 pages, I was like invested in the story. And obviously because it was only a short story, like it ended like earlier than I would have liked. Especially like personally, I would love an entire novel just based on the first short story. And I mean, like, the other three short stories, they're only, like, 40 to 60 pages, so, like, they are shorter, and, like, I didn't get invested in them as much in a full-on novel brain sense, if that makes any sense. Still, the third short story is Time Box by Monet and Eve L. Ewing. That opens upon Raven and Aquila. They're in their first apartment together. And the whole story, like, Time Box felt a lot more domestic than the first two. Like, this one felt much more like one of those things just happen kind of stories. Raven is going about her life, living her life as a young adult. Also, DJ Crash Crash gets name dropped in this story, and from what I remember, DJ Crash Crash turns up in both Monet's albums, The Arch Android and Electric Lady. As someone who is like a music enjoyer, like it was quite cool to see Crash Crash get name dropped. In their apartment, like Raven and Aquila's apartment, they discover their pantry is like the Time Box, and essentially in their pantry, when they go in their pantry, it's essentially like time outside slows down. So like when they go in the pantry, like time to them moves normal, but it's moving faster than the world outside. Basically, it's the gig of how this pantry, the Time Box in their pantry, like, will affect their relationship, and, like, how each of them, want to use this power that they found. The fourth one in this book is Save Changes by Monet and Johan Delgado. Amber is the main character. She's essentially coming home from grocery shopping, and she has this mentality of, like, choosing battles, and in her mind she chooses none. Like Amber's mother Diana, she's on house arrest from being subversive, like Jane 57821, but the only difference between like Diana and Jane was that Jane managed to escape where Diana didn't. But basically, because of Diana, Amber and her sister Larry are like under constant watch, under constant scrutiny, and it's essentially making it hard for them to have a life of their own, really. But Amber has this stone called a Larimer, or it gets called a Larimer, that her father gave to her, that I believe not could turn back time share teas, but could like essentially like rewind and undo things. But however, like this stone, this Larimer, like only this Larimer knows how powerful it is and like how far back it can go. And like each time it gets activated without turning back time, like the power that gets offered like lessens. And I will say, for a while in this short story, it seemed like I didn't think it was going anywhere because everything that was happening was very mundane. But like it wasn't until like, you know, the end. It wasn't until like the end of this story that like all of the, you know, mundane things like made sense and like as to why they were so mundane. And to be honest, if anything, hold on, let me just like check and see how long this one was. Yeah, so Save Changes is like 53 pages, but to be honest, if anything, I feel like this one could have benefited from like being a little bit longer towards the end. Like, I think I would have enjoyed it more had, you know, the ending been a little bit longer. That's not to say it's bad or anything, because it definitely wasn't. But yeah, I just think it could have, you know, benefited from being a little bit longer. And then, you know, the last of the 5 stories is Time Box Altered by Monae and Cherie Renee Thomas. And, you know, given the name, I immediately expected it to be related to Time Box with, you know, Raven and Aquila. But, like, it wasn't. It was only related in the sense that there was a, you know, a different time box in this one. But, you know, this one, it follows Bug, Artis, Ola, and Trell. You know, 4 kids who live outside of New Dawn. I don't remember exactly where they were, but, like, like Sector 7 and Sector 9 got mentioned, so like the 4 of them, they end up making this altar because like Bug believes that their mother that like isn't with them, you know, had left a present for them to find. And you know, Bug believes that the present ends up being like essentially like the schematics and the materials to build the altar. And like the completed altar ends up being like a time box. But like instead of like how the time box worked in Time Box with Raven and Aquila, like it showed like different futures for each of the 4 children that went in. And yeah, that's all 5 of the stories. So I mean, I guess like this, because it's like short stories, like I'm kind of just gonna have to like give my final thoughts, you know, here, because I can't think of anywhere else. Yeah, so I mean, for me, 5th is Time Box Altered. Was it bad? Not particularly. It's just like when I read it, it was just the one that like didn't do anything for me personally. Like, and I feel bad saying this, like if I were to, you know, pick up and read this book again, I could quite happily just, you know, not read Time Box Altered again. Like, and again, like none of them were like outright bad. There are none that I would say this is bad. It was just that personally Time Box Altered, you know, it just did nothing for me. And I mean, 4th, I would put Nevermind. And I will say, I had an extremely difficult time, you know, deciding what was going to be 3rd and 4th. Like, they got flipped around a lot. But I mean, you know, Nevermind with Jane and the Pink Hotel would be 4th. And I mean, it does hurt putting Nevermind here. It just happened to be that I enjoyed, you know, the story that I've put in 3rd more than I did, you know, this one. You know, and I think it was partially because Nevermind was one of the 2 that could have benefited from essentially being a longer book. Like, had it been its full own novel, you know, we could have had expansion into, like, the Pink Hotel, like, how it works. We could have even seen, like, this festival of, like, celebration of creativity that happens every year. Like, we could have seen that, you know, had it been longer. Anyway, 3rd was Save Changes, you know, with Amber and her mother. To be honest, I did think this one slayed, but, like, it didn't slay to me until the very end, where, like, everything, you know, finally made sense. But again, it's only in 3rd because I do think it could have benefited, ironically, from being a little bit longer. Literally, it could have been, like, an extra 5 pages, and I'd have been satisfied with it, like, perfectly. You know, then in 2nd place we have Time Box, like, with Raven and Aquila, like, the first Time Box. Like, this one, it was very simple, like, probably the simplest in concept compared to like the other four, but like I think that's why it worked so well. Like even in, you know, the world of Dirty Computer, like the fact that it was able to work so smoothly, it had its lane, it stayed in its lane, and it got to its destination like on time. It was one of those, it did what it needed to do and it did it very well. And I mean, obviously, to close out, that then means that, like, my number one spot has to be the Memory Librarian, like, the first one. And you know, to put it simply, the Memory Librarian was, like, the closest in terms of, like, structure and story. It was, like, the closest to the kind of book that I'd read normally, as opposed to, like, a short story collection. Like, the Memory Librarian fed what I like the most or the best in terms of fiction. And it's one of those that, like, now that I've sat with it, I appreciate it even more because there's bits about Seshet, and yeah, there's bits about Seshet that, like, I understand more. So yeah, that was it. And like, so that's where I think I'm gonna leave this. Yeah, to close out this video, I don't normally read short story collections. Like, personally as a reader, I would just rather read like one, you know, solid story. That is just personal taste. Like, it's not like a bash on, you know, short story collections just in general. And I think that's because, again, personally, I prefer to, like, write, like, longer form, like, novel length things. So, like, that's, I guess that, my bias is novels. But I mean, still, like, I realise me recording this video like this, it feels weird because I'm not used to doing, like, you know, short story collections, and I feel like I couldn't go as in-depth as I normally like to. I'm still glad that I read The Memory Librarian, and I won't lie, I kinda definitely only picked it up because it, you know, had Monet's name attached to it. But, like, again, I'm glad that I did pick it up and read it, because I did have a genuinely good time reading it. But yeah, I think that's where I'm gonna, you know, leave this video. Have you read The Memory Librarian? Have you listened to any of Janelle Monae's music? If you do, tell me what your favourite song is. For me, personally, it's We Were Rock and Roll. And yeah, you know, feel free to like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you'd really like, and that's it. Okay, bye.